250 years ago, the battles of Lexington and Concord took place. These were the American Revolutionary War's first significant military operations, which led to an American victory and a wave of militia support for the anti-British cause. The battles took place on April 19, 1775 in the towns of Lexington, Concord, Lincoln, Menotomy, now Arlington, and Cambridge in Middlesex County, province of Massachusetts Bay. They signaled the start of hostilities between patriot militias from America's 13 colonies and the Kingdom of Great Britain. In opposition to the changes made to the Massachusetts colonial government by the British Parliament after the Boston Tea Party, colonial leaders adopted the Suffolk Resolves in late 1774. In response, the Colonial Assembly established the Massachusetts Provincial Congress, a patriot provisional government, and ordered local militias to prepare for potential conflict. Outside of Boston, which was under British control, the colony was essentially under the control of the colonial government. In February 1775, the British government responded by declaring Massachusetts to be in rebellion. Under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith, 700 regulars of the British Army in Boston were secretly ordered to seize and destroy military supplies purportedly kept by the Massachusetts militia at Concord. Weeks before the expedition, Patriot leaders had learned through efficient intelligence gathering that their supplies might be in danger and had relocated the majority of them. Several writers, including Paul Revere and Samuel Prescott, reported British plans to militias in the area the night before the battle, quickly alerting them to the British expedition from Boston. Lanterns were used to communicate, one if by land, two if by sea. From the Old North Church in Boston to Charlestown, marking the first waterborne arrival of the army. The first shots were fired just as the sun was rising at Lexington. Their third in command, Ensign Robert Monroe, was among the 8 militiamen killed. The British suffered only one casualty. The regulars continued to Concord, where they divided into companies to look for supplies after the militia was outnumbered and retreated. At around 11 a.m., about 400 militiamen and 100 regulars from 3 companies of the King's troops engaged at Concord's North Bridge, with both sides suffering casualties. In Concord, the outnumbered regulars retreated from the bridge and joined the main British force. After finishing their search for military supplies, the British forces started marching back to Boston, and more militiamen kept coming from the nearby towns. As the regulars marched back toward Boston, gunfire broke out between the two sides once more and persisted all day. Reinforcements led by Brigadier General Hugh Percy, who would later become Duke of Northumberland and was at this time referred to by the courtesy title Earl Percy, saved Lieutenant Colonel Smith's expedition upon the return to Lexington. After a tactical withdrawal under heavy fire, the combined force of roughly 1,700 men eventually made it to the safety of Charlestown and marched back to Boston. The siege of Boston began when the gathered militias blockaded the limited land access points to Boston and Charlestown. In his Concord hymn, Ralph Waldo Emerson refers to the Patriots' opening shot at the North Bridge as the shot heard round the world. Also today is the day the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising took place in 1943. Nazi Germany's last attempt to move the remaining ghetto residents to the gas chambers of the Majdanek and Treblinka extermination camps was met with resistance from the Jewish community in the Warsaw Ghetto in German-occupied Poland during World War II. The remaining Jews started to construct bunkers and smuggle explosives and weapons into the ghetto, following the summer of 1942 gross action Warsaw, in which over 250,000 Jews were murdered and deported from the ghetto to Treblinka. Both the right-wing Jewish military union and the left-wing Jewish combat organization were established, and started training. Polish resistance groups began to actively support the Jews after a minor resistance attempt against another roundup in January 1943 was partially successful. When the ghetto refused to turn itself in, police commander SS Brigadeführer Jürgen Stroop, on April 19th, the uprising began. Stroop then ordered the ghetto to be destroyed block by block until May 16th. Of the 13,000 Jews who died, roughly half were suffocated or burnt alive. Stroop reported 110 German casualties, including 17 killed. During World War II, the uprising was the biggest Jewish uprising. The Jews were aware that survival was unlikely and victory was impossible. Not to allow the German alone to pick the time and place of our deaths was the motivation behind their fight, according to Marek Edelman, the last surviving ZOB commander who passed away in 2009. The rebellion was deemed one of the most significant occurrences in the history of the Jewish people by the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. Then on April 19, 1989, during a fleet drill in the Caribbean Sea close to Puerto Rico, an explosion took place inside the number 2 16-inch gun turret of the USS Iowa, BB-61. In addition to killing 47 of the turret's crew, the explosion in the center gun room seriously damaged the gun turret. The U.S. Navy conducted one of two significant investigations into the cause of the explosion, followed by Sandia National Laboratories and the Government Accountability Office. The investigations produced conflicting conclusions. Clayton Hartwig, a member of the gun turret crew who perished in the explosion, was found to have intentionally caused it by the U.S. Navy's initial investigation into the incident. Numerous media links during the investigation later credited to U.S. Navy officers and investigators suggested that Hartwig had a romantic relationship with another sailor, Kendall Truitt, and that Hartwig was responsible for the explosion after their relationship had soured. However, according to the U.S. Navy's report, Hartwig was suicidal and used either a chemical or electronic detonator to cause the explosion, rather than being homosexual as the evidence suggested. Members of Congress, the media, and the relatives of the victims all harshly criticized the U.S. Navy's conclusions. Following hearings to question the Navy's investigation, the U.S. Senate and U.S. House Armed Services Committees issued reports that contested the findings of the U.S. Navy. The GAO was asked to examine the U.S. Navy's investigation by the Senate Committee. Sandia National Laboratory sent a team of scientists to review the Navy's technical investigation to help the GAO. Sandia concluded during its review that the gun's powder bags had probably been rammed faster and farther into the gun breech than intended, which caused the powder to ignite while loading was still underway. The Navy's subsequent test verified that an explosion could have been caused by an overarm. Additionally, Sandia's technicians discovered that the physical evidence refuted the U.S. Navy's theory and that the explosion was caused by an electronic or chemical detonator. With Sandia's help, the U.S. Navy reopened the investigation in light of the new findings. When Sandia and the GAO finished their reports in August 1991, they concluded that the explosion was most likely the result of powder bags accidentally overflowing the 16-inch gun's breech. However, the U.S. Navy disagreed with Sandia's assessment and concluded that it was impossible to identify the cause of the explosion. The U.S. Navy closed its investigation and apologized to Hartwig's family, but did not offer an apology. Also, on April 19, 1993, at the Mount Carmel Center in Waco, Texas, the FBI launched a tear gas assault on the Branch Davidian compound, ending a tense 51-day standoff between the federal government and an armed religious cult. The compound was destroyed by fire by the end of the day, and about 80 Branch Davidians, 22 of whom were children, had died in the conflagration. U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno authorized a tear gas attack on the compound on April 18th. The Branch Davidians were notified on the impending attack and asked to surrender at around 6 a.m. on April 19th, but they refused. A few minutes later, Bradley tanks fired tear gas canisters through the windows of the compound as 2 FBI combat vehicles started putting gas into the building. By 11:40 a.m., the final of about 100 tear gas canisters was fired into the compound because the Branch Davidians, many of whom were wearing gas masks, refused to leave. 9 Davidians escaped the quickly spreading fire minutes after it broke out at one or more spots on the compound shortly after noon. There were reports of gunfire, but it stopped when the compound was consumed by the fire. The second catastrophic attack on Mount Carmel by the federal government claimed the lives of David Koresh and at least 80 of his supporters, including 22 children. Citing an eyewitness account and other forensic evidence, the FBI and the Justice Department insisted there was proof beyond a reasonable doubt that the Branch Davidian members started the fire. The government claimed that the gunfire during the fire was either part of a suicidal pact between the Davidians or that the Davidians were killing dissenters who tried to flee the fire suicide that Koresh had ordered. The majority of the remaining Branch Davidians disagreed with this final official stance, as did some critics in the media and elsewhere who leveled accusations ranging from premeditated murder to incompetence against the AATF and FBI's handling of the Waco standoff. The FBI acknowledged using tear gas grenades, which have been known to start fires due to their incendiary qualities in the assault in 1993. And last but not least, 30 years ago today, the Oklahoma City bombing took place. It was a domestic terrorist truck bombing attack of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma on April 19, 1995, the second anniversary of the end of the Waco siege. It also happened on the same day that Richard Snell, a white supremacist from Arkansas, was put to death for having predicted that day that a bombing would occur. It is still unknown, despite rumors whether Snell's execution was the reason behind the bombing. Before the September 11th attacks in 2001, the Oklahoma City bombing was the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in American history, and it continues to be so today. In remembrance of the bombing victims, the Oklahoma City National Memorial was dedicated to the location of the Murrah Federal Building on April 19, 2000. Every year on April 19th, the day of the explosion, memorial services were held. The bombing, which took place at 9:02 a.m. and was carried out by anti-government extremists Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, murdering 168 people, injuring 680, and it destroyed over 1/3 of the building, which had to be demolished. An estimated $652 million worth of damage was caused by the explosion, which also destroyed or damaged 324 other buildings. Following the bombing, numerous rescue operations were conducted by local, state, federal, and international agencies. With 665 rescue personnel, the Federal Emergency Management Agency activated 11 of its urban search and rescue task forces. Oklahoma Highway Patrolman Charles Hanger stopped Timothy McVeigh for driving without a license plate and arrested him for illegally possessing weapons within 90 minutes of the explosion. Both McVeigh and Terry Nichols were charged within days after forensic evidence immediately connected them to the attack. Nichols was taken into custody after Michael and Lori Fortier were found to have been complicit. McVeigh, a Gulf War veteran and supporter of the American militia movement, parked a Ryder rental truck in front of the building and set it off with explosives. It was Nichols who had helped prepare the bomb. McVeigh planned his attack to take place on the second anniversary of the fire that ended the Waco siege in 1993, motivated by the distaste for the U.S. federal government and its treatment of Ruby Ridge in 1992 and the Waco siege of 93. Although it has not been verified, Snell had previously stated that he wanted to blow up the Mira Federal Building 12 years before the bombing. The OKBOMB official FBI investigation comprised nearly 1 billion pieces of information, 3,200 kilograms of evidence, and 28,000 interviews. During their raid on McVeigh's house, the FBI discovered a phone number that directed them to a farm where McVeigh had brought bomb materials. In 1997, the bombers were put on trial and found guilty. On June 11, 2001, McVeigh was put to death by lethal injection by the U.S. Federal Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. In 2004, Nichols received a life sentence. The Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act in '96, which was passed by the U.S. Congress in reaction to the bombing, among other things, restricted access to habeas corpus in the U.S. to prevent further terrorist attacks. It also passed legislation to strengthen security around federal buildings. Sorry, my face is almost numb after telling you all that information. As you know, April 19th is an important day in American history, and no American here shall ever forget. And every year here also, the Jews will never forget the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising that occurred in Poland, in which Jewish resistance uprised against their occupiers. And as you see, I am wearing my American shirt. Look at it. Stars and stripes, baby. Stars and stripes. This is what I wear every year on April the 19th, as well as the 19th of December, as well as the 11th of September and the 7th of December. And also the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. For the Jews never forgetting that catastrophe, I have decorated my iWatch with the Israeli flag. Look at it. It means that I support the Jewish people in Israel, and I'm never changing it. There were a lot of criticism and Islamic Nazi punks comparing the Israel Defense Forces to the Nazis, and that's not true. They're just using that to boost their propaganda morale and brainwashing more people to make them look like terrorists. But they're the so-called Palestinian terrorists. They're brainwashing people to making them believe the IDF are terrorists. But that's all a stupid lie. Hell, I saw Facebook videos of so-called Arab refugees acting to make the UN believe that Israel's committing genocide. And no, I don't believe that. No, the UN is no longer the United Nations. It's now called the United Nazis. Also, I've watched documentaries about the Oklahoma City bombing, and they snuck out to me. I even watched one yesterday, which is from the show Crimes of the Century, and they provided us accurate information on what led to the Oklahoma City bombing on April 19th, 1995. Well, that's all the events I have for today. If you like what I told you, be sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below. There's also some bad weather happening. Tomorrow is Easter Sunday, and those who are Christian, I wish you all a happy early Easter, and